We are climbing Jacob's ladder, soldiers of the cross. And Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. And he lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night, because the sun was set. And he took of the stones of that place and put them for his pillows and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. These are just 3 verses in a book of Genesis, at chapter 28, about a dream that Jacob had. After the chapter in which his own brother had deceived his father to steal his blessing, and still filled with envy had vowed to kill Jacob for the blessing that had been given to him by his father, Isaac, the son of Abraham, who had been placed for sacrifice. And so immediately we become aware that Jacob was not just somebody from nowhere, but had an expectation of reward that had been frustrated, setting the seeds for continuing strife within his own family, setting the stage for this divine vision of a stairway to heaven with angels upon it ascending and descending from on high to earth and back to heaven. Where these heavenly hosts went after descending to this biblical account does not say. Guardian angels, perhaps. And is perhaps left to the reader's imagination, nor from whence they came upon return to the glories of heaven. But there is an implied assumption that what had come down must have gone back up again, like a science. And we can derive from the following verses that even without a vast comprehension of the particular mechanics involved, that Jacob had felt privileged and honored to have been able to have seen that to which no other earthly being, at least to his knowledge, had ever seen before. Top secrets. Just a glimpse of the connection between the terrestrial existence of mortal limits and that which was the eternal. And although that could make for a sermon in itself, as it indeed has in multiple pulpits and places of worship, each with its own special homily message, I'd like to turn to another story from the life of Jacob, in which most may be familiar and with more contemporary connection, and with regard to the genesis of a novel coronavirus that has left an enduring mark upon the lives of most around the world today, totaling 5 million fatalities worldwide. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb. I am a candidate for U.S. Congress in Virginia's 8th Congressional District, a son of a preacher man of some distinction, a veteran with a rather unique military history, and at least according to the Progressive Voters Guide, I was on record opposed to the government response to the current public health crisis, especially regarding the popular narrative regarding a zoonotic evolution, and that opposition has given rise to multiple litigations in both state and federal courts, primarily in defense of the faith and places of worship, with at least one currently docketed for certiorari at the nation's highest court, and with 2 more pending the same status on issues from the lockdowns and the masks to the vaccine mandates, which are probably the most significant issue in the present debates. And I believe that the best way to explain exactly how these litigations fit together into one coordinated concept is found in the story of Jacob and his later encounter after his dream, and his wrestling with a certain stranger of unknown identity, where his story picks up in chapter 22, engaged in military battle with his own brother, who had stolen his blessing, Esau, still fighting after many years had passed. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, "Let me go, for the day breaketh." And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. Every rung goes higher and higher. Soldiers of the cross. So we can see in this story that a certainly blessed Jacob was in an encounter with a powerful adversary, and he demonstrated some persistence throughout that battle, refusing to let go of the powerful adversary, even though he had been wounded in the struggle. And he refused to let go until he had received his reward in a blessing that he was very certain that his adversary could provide. And in a legal context, for those familiar with courts, there is an often referred to concept of standing, wherein a person who decides to prosecute battle in a court must have received a direct and personal injury, as indeed Jacob had, which would become a permanent injury for the rest of his life. And in standing, the court must have the power to grant the relief for which the complainant seeks. You have to go to a court that can make you whole again. And as said in the famous case of Marbury v. Madison, it is the emphatic duty and province of the Judiciary Department to say what the law is. And this case, which had been even quoted in U.S. v. Nixon during the Watergate crisis, had played a central role in our latest litigation, where one of the most prominent issues has presented a claim for injunctive relief and declaratory relief under the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. Also, raising claims of executive privilege and intelligence, which were central in U.S. v. Nixon, in an effort to compel a response from the White House to a FOIA request it had refused to answer since March 23rd, 2021, when it acknowledged receipt of the request. A simple yes or no question, but a cleverly designed question under administrative law and the formal processes of government that provide an audit trail for official government actions, and shall, when answered, finally answer the question to one of the continuing controversies about the origins of a novel coronavirus, alleged to be zoonotically evolved, which the president's top medical advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has consistently maintained and presented to the American public that it had to have been the product of a zoonotic evolution and did not find origins in a government research laboratory, which some have alleged had some intimate connection as the most highly compensated federal employee responsible for funding research of medical technology to include personal protective equipment, testing, and vaccines, big business in pandemic, possessing means, motive, and opportunity, the classic elements of proof in many criminal trials, at least on television and in the movies. Sinner, do you love my Jesus, soldiers of the cross? Now, some people accept on what might be called a secular equivalent of faith, taking opiates for the masses in vaccines, that a novel coronavirus was zoonotically evolved. No one to date has ever located the exact zoonotic source for a novel coronavirus, even down to the exact animal species that came in contact with one or even several groups of people and caused this zoonosis to occur that became a pandemic pathogen that had by November claimed the lives of over 700,000 Americans and over 5 million worldwide. A true crime in nature against humanity, or wrath of God. An unsolved murder mystery. And at least if some persons had lost a loved one, had been infected, had been forced to alter their lifestyle, had suffered some economic loss through loss of employment or education, or had their religious liberties adversely impacted just for the sake of being made whole again, it might be a sufficient reason, sure action, to at least establish the source of this pandemic pathogen, and just from an empirical analysis to ensure that that source does not create another pandemic again in the future. Because in science, if something has occurred once, it can and probably will happen again, like a science. So to be proactive for the future, prevent the pandemic next time, action would be required. But there is currently not even an effort anymore to establish the identity of the source of the outbreak, zoonotically evolved, not even from Dr. Fauci, who is apparently perfectly satisfied with the idea that we will never know the answer. And so if this presents a future problem, we will just have to wake up surprised again, which is at least an interesting position for a person who took a Hippocratic oath and who has claimed to be the nation's leading infectious disease prevention and control expert. Does he not have a duty? But taking the position of those who are not just satisfied with the explanation that Fauci said, there is one Fauci said item from an email dated April 17, 2020 to Francis Collins at NIH, responding to an email titled Conspiracy Gains Momentum, in which Fauci said, I would not do anything about this right now. It is a shiny object that will go away in time. A shiny object that will go away in time, all by itself. Very scientific. A copy of this email was obtained by Congressman Jim Jordan and James Comer and presented to HHS Secretary Xavier Becerra on January 22nd, 2022. Following this timeline, on December 19th, just a month before, 2021, Dr. Francis Collins, MD and PhD, and a Stanton, Virginia native, who was a physician geneticist who had been appointed by President Barack Obama, decided to step down as the director of NIH just before this letter was presented to the HHS secretary, coincidentally, even after having been asked to stay on by the current administration. This announcement was published by NIH on December 16th, just 3 days before his abrupt decision to depart. He suddenly decided he wanted to spend more time with family. And exactly 1 month before this email from Dr. Fauci to Dr. Collins on March 17th, 2020, Christian Anderson at Scripps Research Center had published a only three pages, scientific report that was published in the correspondence section of the medical journal Nature Medicine, entitled The Proximal Origin of SARS-CoV-2. And this correspondence, has become the most cited source for a claim that a novel coronavirus had been zoonotically evolved just 3 months after the first reports of a pneumonia of unknown etiology was announced by the Beijing government. And without identifying a specific zoonotic source, without any extensive, robust investigations, Simply Theory had presented the conclusion that had the SARS-like coronavirus been cultivated in a government research laboratory, its engagement at the furin cleavage site with the ACE2 enzyme would have been more efficient, as has apparently been recently achieved through as many as 32 of 50 mutations in the Omicron variant by natural selection of a virus that the CDC director says is not stupid. And for your edification, if you believe that a novel coronavirus did not find origins in a laboratory, this is what you are saying that you believe as a person who follows the science. And this was the conclusion of Christian Anderson, who had, in an email to Dr. Fauci dated January 31st, 2020, stated that both he and his colleagues were convinced that the novel coronavirus had been cultivated in a laboratory. And these were scientists looking in a microscope at this genome. Yet in less than a week Anderson and apparently his colleagues had rejected what he then began to describe as crackpot ideas. And by April, as shown by this email presented by Congressman Jordan and Congressman Comey to the director of HHS, Dr. Fauci was convinced that these crackpot ideas would all just go away, shiny objects, and has even to date been perfectly comfortable with the thought that we may never know the exact zoonotic source that had, through a natural science, claimed the lives of over 5 million people worldwide and may do so again. And if you accept this idea of zoonotic evolution, arising in simple nature, a virus that isn't stupid, then that is what you have said that you believe as someone who follows the science. Were they only following lawful orders, performing their patriotic duty? Were they doing the right thing? And as intriguing as that is on many levels, the laboratory origin theory presents quite a few similar assumptions, to include the fact that if a novel coronavirus had been the product of a laboratory that somehow escaped from perfect government scientists who could create a perfect coronavirus if they tried, it had to have had a long timeline and would have involved a cast of many characters and personalities in important positions, not just within the U.S. government, but also other cooperating nations, for which some have identified a particular email, documentary evidence from Dr. Fauci dated February 1st, 2020, a Saturday. What government worker, perfect in every way, works on a Saturday? In which he frantically wrote to Dr. Hugh Ockenshaw, his deputy at NIAID, and forwarding a copy of another scientific article of about 5 pages, just 5 pages, titled "A SARS-like cluster of circulating bat coronaviruses shows potential for human emergence," which was published on November 9th, 2015 in the journal Nature, and announcing the successful cultivation of a SARS-like coronavirus in vitro, not just in vivo. The very first virus in history to have been ever cultivated in vitro. And as such, able to be patented and owned by a government. And in joint research between the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the Wuhan Virology Institute. An article that some have described as a smoking gun, and an article that has been amended twice since its publication, once in April 6, 2016, and then on May 22nd, 2020. In the pandemic, this scientific article was revised 1 month after Fauci's email to Dr. Collins, in which he had expressed his opinion that this shiny object and crackpot theory would all just go away by itself, just like everything in science, and never come back. Were they only following lawful orders, performing their patriotic duty? Were they doing the right thing? Were they following the science? Rise and shine. Give God the glory. Soldiers of the cross. And in addition to a long timeline ramp-up, there is an assumption that from the very beginning of the pandemic, there would have to have existed a coordinated network of persons working in collusion to and in furtherance of a continuing plan, or what has been described as a plandemic. And in support of this theory, many questions arise during the announcement of the original outbreak in China. Just as few as 27 cases of infection with a pneumonia of unknown etiology. A pneumonia we had never seen before, with no reported fatalities amongst vendors at the Hunan wholesale seafood market, but not affecting any of the other persons who visited the market. A venue measuring the size of 9 American football fields in a city with a population of 8 to 11 million that had become international news, setting off alarms with genetic sequences being shared around the world regarding not a handful of not yet lethal cases of pneumonia that had somehow been determined to be different without any test. Just as a current case of COVID-19 infection may often appear to you, the lay person, or even to a physician without any test to be a simple case of flu or the common cold. How and why did they distinguish these cases? But again, if you believe in the zoonotic evolution theory, then that is what you say that you believe as a scientist, following the science. And on April 17, 2020, Dr. Anthony Fauci said that this shiny object would all just go away. Like anything in science. Were they only following lawful orders, performing their patriotic duty? Were they doing the right thing? Were they following the science? Or was it evolving science? But to complete a pandemic, there would have to have been some extensive level of coordination at the state and local level, which is the exact point of focus of our current litigation now on appeal to the Virginia State Supreme Court, where actions that create a reasonable level of suspicion at the very beginning of the public health crisis in the Commonwealth of Virginia, when there were only approximately 5,000 cases nationwide, less than 100 fatalities in Virginia, and when very little was reported to have been officially known about an invisible enemy that did not even present itself in Bath County, Virginia, until July 2020. After the lockdowns, after the masks, after everything had happened, not in Bath County until July. Why? By April 2020, was the nation's only physician serving as a state governor promoting the ideas of COVID-19 vaccinations for children, over a year before the vaccines would be fully developed and approved for children. Why? Just 1 week after the announcement of a public health emergency of international concern, did the state health commissioner declare a communicable disease of public health threat 1 month before any reported case had even presented in Virginia, a power that he lacked under the law? Why did the city of Alexandria on March 21st, 2021 decide to close out an online complaint that had raised concerns about conflicting reports that had appeared in the largest sample size tracer contact study before the Virginia lockdowns, examining almost 56,000 laboratory-confirmed cases, identify the elderly as being the most vulnerable age cohort, reporting that the Chinese government had already begun to reopen the areas around Wuhan, the only ones that had been restricted after only a month, that had advised that there were guidelines to protect the elderly without any pharmacological intervention, and which had stated in plain English that there was no evidence to support the conclusion that COVID-19 was being transmitted from person to person after validating a secondary attack rate of less than 5% from among tracer contacts, a function that was blown off nationwide for months. 5%. Less than 5%, which is 4 times too low to validate a communicable or contagious disease, and 12 times too low to set off a super spreader event. Why did they take that less than 5% and translate it first as being equivalent to an R0 of at least 2.2? Why did they raise it for no reason to an R0 of 6? Why, upon the presentation of the Delta variant, did they simply continue to use R0 and declare that it was at least 8 or 9 and comparable in contagiousness to chickenpox and measles, which are 90% infectious? Why today, according to Business Insider, do they say that the Omicron variant is 4 times more infectious than measles. What would 4 times 90% be? That would be over 100%, which is not even mathematics. Were they only following lawful orders, performing their patriotic duty? Were they doing the right thing? Were they following the science? If you love him, why not serve him? Soldiers of the cross. And as our present matter now raises on appeal to the state Supreme Court, could a city sheriff in Alexandria, Virginia, have known about a larger worldwide conspiracy to create a pandemic crisis? Then why did he decide to avoid serving a complaint upon the governor and the state health commissioner? Why then, when an action was brought to the attention of the Commonwealth attorney to investigate these actions involving not just contempt of court in a court order and malfeasance in office, but also felony conspiracy to evade a summons, as well as conspiracy to violate civil rights, did he not take action? Why then did the sheriff, again tasked by the court to serve a copy of that complaint, to bring himself accountable, did he fail to serve a copy on the Commonwealth attorney or even to himself? And why, approaching retirement at the end of the year, after the governor had repeatedly warned that places of worship were hotbeds of infection, did he suddenly decide to find Jesus in a pandemic and join a church just before the November election? Why did the chief of police suddenly resign immediately after the complaint was filed at the courthouse? Why did the acting sheriff, the acting chief of police, stay on to replace him? Replaced after only a month on the job. And if you believe that a novel coronavirus was zoonotically evolved, perhaps you can present a scientific explanation or legal explanation as to why the sheriff and a Commonwealth attorney would be afraid to have a case come to court. In at least one very, very famous case of crimes against humanity, the court found it very dispositive that Adolf Eichmann knew the tales of the tonics that he had approved with his signature. And that was enough knowledge of a wider conspiracy for him to be convicted of crimes against humanity. This briefing is unclassified. Until next time, you have the right to remain silent, as you will. My name is Major Mike Webb, and by God, I am running for U.S. Congress. Next year, make the right choice, and we shall make America great again. Honest. And y'all come back now. Yeah? Carry on.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
Thunk, I could have had a vaccine.